Everyone has some sort of a closet that's become too small. A closet is no place to live, and I want to support as many people as I can in stepping out of that prison into the fullness of life that's waiting for them on the other side of that closet door. I'm Nancy Shadlock from Centered Life Coaching. Join me in listening to these Coming Out Chronicles. Get curious about your story, and then see what good things are waiting for you on the other side of your closet door.
A few months ago, I had someone say to me, "We haven't heard any coming out stories from a Catholic person." And I thought, "Oh, yeah, you're right. It's mostly been um, evangelical or no religion kind of coming out stories." And so I'm so excited that our guest today comes at it from a Catholic viewpoint. And we really go into some tender areas of dads, particularly, and how to connect or reconnect with dads once you've come out, and how hard that can be sometimes, but also how there's space for that to grow into something beautiful. So I hope you'll be inspired today. Hannah Stringer, it's so awesome to have you on the show today.
Hi, Nancy. It's good to be on.
Awesome. So, without further ado, jump into your coming out story. What would you like to share with us today?
Where to start, right?
Yeah.
Well, I grew up in a small conservative town kind of in the middle of Wisconsin. So, I was raised Catholic. So my mom's side of the family's Catholic. My dad's Lutheran. And so that was always a big part of, my life growing up. I was, a mass server. So I was up, being there right there with the priest, getting, the firsthand look, if you will, of the mass most weekends. I went to Catholic grade school, so everything I really knew evolved around the church. And obviously, with that came, a sort of expectation that being homosexual is a sin. And I didn't have any frame of reference growing up, like for what it meant to be gay. So it never crossed my mind because how could I be? Like, that's a sin. I'm going to hell if it was the case. And I do remember too, like, because Ellen DeGeneres had her talk show. And my mom and I would like to watch it because she was funny and it was fun. And my dad's like, "Why are you watching her? She's a lesbian." I'm like, "Okay, what does that have to do with anything?" Sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when I got off, I went to college in Minneapolis. So I went from a small town to a big city. And like in art school, you have a wide variety of different sorts of people, very unique. Like, it was a culture shock to say the least for me. But I still found myself kind of burying that piece down. Like, I was always so involved in my studies. Like in high school, I never got the boy craze. I'm like, I'm just involved in my studies. It'll come later. College, I just got involved in my studies again. I studied animation, so I was in the computer lab like all the time. And it really wasn't until after college, I was in therapy, just dealing with anxiety stuff, that I forget what we were talking about. But my therapist is like, "Do you think you might be gay?" I'm like, "What?" And it was just such a direct question that kind of, I don't know, in a sense, like exploded like my whole world.
Mm.
And but as things started coming back like together, it like formed this like beautiful puzzle pieces and things that, looking back, they make so much more sense now because it's like,
Right.
yes, I am gay. And this is like,
Mm.
if I would have, been aware in high school, like there were, certain upperclassmen that I was like really attracted to, or I wouldn't have called it attraction at the time. I just wanted to be with them. I'm like, "Oh, she's really
Mm-hmm.
cool. Let's hang out and be friends." But, if younger Hannah would have known, it'd been like, "No, you're actually like attracted to this person."
Mm. What do you think your counselor was seeing that put two and two together?
I think because we were talking a little bit, I think, about just like relationships in general. And I think there's always been like a hesitancy on my part to really even, I don't know, talk about being in a relationship because it just didn't like, I had zero interest in being with a guy. And so it was something that just wasn't comfortable for me. And like when like, any of the time that was brought up, like I just felt odd and different. So it was like I just kind of shut down a little bit. So I think as we were talking through stuff and just, I mean, obviously there's always this longing, to belong, to be with someone, to have, your second, your other half, if you will. And so I kind of wonder too, like what she did pick up on other stuff. But I think at that moment we were kind of touching a little bit on the realm of like relationships and what that looks like. Cause I did dabble in the, I forget what it's called, but it's some Christian dating site that I'm like, oh, I'm going to find myself a good old Christian guy. And clearly that's not the case. No. Yeah, so I'm not quite
Did you
sure.
go on some dates with guys then?
I did not.
No, nobody struck your interest.
No, I mean, there was a few back and forth, like, on the chat, but I'm like, I have really no desire to meet you because you seem, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then what? You got kind of what I get this picture of almost like a combination lock or something, and all of a sudden you get the last number and you're like, it unlocks everything and you get to see it all.
I love that visual. That's so true. Yeah, it took me a while because she laid that bombshell on me, and obviously I got my brain just like putting all the pieces together and seeing that all. And I actually remember that same day I was running an errand at work, and I completely was lost in my head. Was coming up on an intersection, but I was seeing the light that was after it. So I blew through a red light. I hit somebody, totaled my car in there. It's like everybody was fine.
This is right after your session.
Maybe like, I don't know, 3 hours after it.
Right, but that day, yeah.
Yep. And so, so we had that happen. And it was like one of those things where it's like, okay. Like you realize then too, like just how caught up in that you are. And it took a lot of time for me to, I think, not only just start to talk about it with my therapist, but to say the words, I am gay. And like, I have rabbits, so that's my animal of choice. I have 2 of them right now. But at the time, my very first rabbit, she was an English Angora. And I remember just sitting there one night, just like snuggling with her and crying. Like, and I was just, there's a lot of emotions there. And she was the first like living being that I uttered those words to out loud. And it just had such a profound effect, because when you actually say that out loud, it makes it more real. And then to have, the safe space of it just being with a rabbit where they can't talk back to you, and they're going to love you unconditionally unless you don't feed them on time. But and so like that kind of helped catapult me more into like being able to talk about that with my therapist and being able to kind of dig into some of the things that, hold me back from, being out in life, and what did that look like growing up and all that stuff. And I remember she was going on maternity leave not too long after like I started like really digging into this, and she recommended a group therapy. There was one starting that was like a coming out lesbian group. I'm like, okay, like the thought of it like terrified me, because here I would have to like be with more people like saying this stuff. And I knew it was like the right thing to do, like the next best step for me on my journey. And I remember sitting in a parking lot, like during lunch break at work, like I had the phone in my hand, like the number was dialed, and like, okay, just got hit dial. And it took me a while to build up that courage, hit send, they answer the phone, and I had to like be like, what about your coming out lesbian group? And it was like really hard just to utter that out loud. But I did it. I went to the first like meetup, which was really terrifying, but then a really cool thing happened. Like I realized I wasn't alone. And like, that, but you don't know that until you are able to share your experiences with other people who are going through, similar struggles and questioning what's right for them, and, navigating the different relationship challenges that pop up with that. So I think it was like an eight week kind of program. And by the end of it, like there was almost like this weight lifted, and I felt more confident in kind of who I was. Like there's still obviously a lot going on, but it was definitely a big catalyst that kind of shifted where I was going in my coming out journey.
There's so much power in speaking it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've been the first person some people have ever said it to in a session. And then at retreats, we've had people who've said it out loud to a group of safe people for the first time. And it's just like such a game changer. And you're right, it really like ignites the rest of what can open up for people.
Yeah. Powerful stuff for sure.
Okay, so you said it out loud in a
Yep.
group. And then what happened?
And then I was kind of faced with, like the what next. So now this group is done, like, what am I doing sort of thing. And I have a couple friends who, like, I need to tell them, like, I need to like start getting this out into my immediate circle. And I remember going on a walk with one of them, and it was like a good 3-mile walk. And like, I just couldn't get it out of my mouth. And then by the time we were done, she's like, oh, you want to come over and have like a bonfire? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I had like some extra time to be like, okay, now we got to do it. So we're sitting there in front of the fire, and I finally just say those words. I'm like, hey, I have this thing I've realized, I'm gay. And she was just like super supportive and loving. And she even went to Pride with me that year because I had no one else to go with. And, having, and then I told my other friend too shortly after, but having those two people in my corner then just made things easier in a sense, because I knew I had them. I knew they had my back. So when it got to the point where it's time to tell my parents, I'm like, okay, no matter what happens, I know I can turn to these people. And I had started kind of the online dating a little bit, like just kind of dipping my toe in the water, seeing what's out there. And I ended up, going on a couple dates. And then it was like, I think it was right around the 4th of July. My now girlfriend of 6 years was like, hey, do you want to, be girlfriends? I'm like, yeah, let's do it. And so like when you get in a relationship too, like especially one that like for me it was new. Like I had never been in a relationship with a guy. And like this was my first kind of real relationship. Like it's fun and it's terrifying, and you want to share that with people. And so like I would find like my parents are still in Wisconsin, so they're 3 hours away, and all of a sudden on the phone calls, like there's this new name kept popping up, and like they had no idea, but it's like I like just felt like I was hiding something. And I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I need to make this drive home. Like I need to tell them. And so I remember hopping in the car, like the longest 3-hour drive of my life. And I got home, and it was just my mom, because my dad was caught up at I think he was like on some work trip or something. But we were outside, and I just, I told my mom, I'm like, this is me. This is what who I am. And, to her credit, she took it in stride. Like she was confused. Like at one point, my parents both separately asked me if like my brother was gay, because his best friend growing up was very more like, I don't want to say flamboyant, but like they would hold like Barbie fashion shows and stuff. And it turned out, that friend of his is gay, but, they were thinking the wrong child was gay. So it's kind of a surprise for them when I was the one to come out. But her questions were like, oh, did moving to the city make you gay? Like, what did we do? Like, it was just all these questions like, why? How did this happen? And so that kind of starts that whole almost like a reprogramming, like their vision of me in their heads. Like, granted, I'm the same person they knew like 2 seconds before I told them, but now this new piece of information's in there, and it's throwing, them all over the place, and wondering where did this come from, sort of thing. But she was good about it. Like she didn't increase any of the anxiety or anything I had, except when she's like, okay, so now how are you going to tell your dad? Because like he's the one I was most concerned about, because he's, very much more involved in the church and has more of those traditional views, and they're a little more set in his ways, if you will. I'm like, I don't know. Like I literally had something written out on my phone, and my mom had to go to bed so she could get up early for work before my dad got home. So I'm like, oh, great. You're going to leave me here by myself to tackle this with dad. But as soon as he got home, I'm like, I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen. And like, whereas my mom, I just had like a conversation, like with my dad, I literally had to read what I had written. And I just remember there being like a silence as he just kind of took it in and started processing it. And, he said, he still loves me and supports me and stuff, but there's definitely, a sticking point there. And it's still something to this day that we're kind of working through, because I've always been like a daddy's girl. He was my guy. And now it's hard, to turn to him for things, because I know he's struggling with like the religious piece of it. What does the Bible say, or thinks the Bible says? And like, obviously, most churches, preach that, same-sex attraction is a sin. So he goes a lot about the, like, well, it's fine as long as you don't act on anything. And, we're, to his credit though, like, he's trying, like, I've been giving him certain books and things and popping things his way that kind of resonate with me and my experiences as I work up, it takes a lot of emotional energy to have conversations with somebody who has, 6 decades worth of beliefs to, like, try to reconcile with what they know to be true, about their daughter now.
Especially as the person that it impacts the most. It's hard to be that person to have
Yep.
that conversation.
So true. But he's trying, and I think we're getting to a place where we can have like another conversation, because there was multiple, like, right after I came out, of him just trying to wrap his head around everything. And I kind of let it kind of simmer for a while, because I was still uncomfortable, like, being out too. So like, my close friends knew, my family knew, but like, I wasn't, I didn't have that rainbow flag behind me. I didn't have, anything that, I didn't talk about it. And so as I started becoming more comfortable with who I am, and I've started, really showing up, like, my whole business now is to help other queer entrepreneurs be themselves. Like, I have this innate just desire to help people just step into their authenticity, because I know how freeing that can be. It's a lifelong journey, I feel. But so as I'm showing up in different ways, and as I'm learning more about myself and how to articulate, because that's part of the problem too, is like, some of it's like, how do you get out of your head what you're feeling and what, like, you're experiencing, so somebody else can understand or try to understand. And so, as I've grown, I feel like we're at a point where we can have another conversation and go a little deeper instead of the surface stuff we had started with.
A couple of weeks ago on the podcast, we interviewed the producer of the movie called 1946.
Yes.
And I think that might be super helpful for your dad too.
I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, like it wasn't until 1946 that the word homosexual first came into the Bible. So that just seems like
mind-boggling.
Right. So there's so many interpretation things that we need to look at in a new light.
And I love that, they're producing this movie and getting it out into the world, and, really shedding light on. It's amazing what just one mistranslation, that domino effect it's had, that snowballed into what, we're looking at as a society, as countries, as the world, and how they view, being gay, being bi, being trans. And it's like, all for what?
Yeah. I noticed when you said what your dad's response was, you had the words, I still love you. And then you said like a but at the end. And that, I think that that's so important for people listening in, because I have had parents say, like, what do I say to my kid when they come out? And not using those words is super helpful. But I also get that, like, it's hard not to, because someone recently told me something about themselves that, isn't my best hope for them. And I tried all of my like good coaching practices to be like, I love you. And then I was like, I don't want to add no matter what.
Right.
Like, I love you. even though, or like, it's like, how do you do that? Like, what would be a beautiful response in your mind?
That's such a good question, because I'm with you. I mean, it is like just like a natural response that I still love you. Like, I love you no matter what. And I think the intention is typically there.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even just like a straight I love you, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In like the but piece gets me a lot, because I remember sharing the very first podcast I went on and openly shared my coming out story. I was excited about it and I shared it on my Facebook. And my dad's like, I love you, but. And then he had some like Bible thing in there. And I'm like, oh my God, okay. And you just have to like all of a sudden this excitement about like, yes, this is me like showing up is like, now you're squashed. You're like, okay, what does this mean? Sort of thing. And that's what opened the whole other like can of worms, or reopened it, with my dad and trying to like come to terms with it. Because there's on twofold with the parents. It's like, I've noticed, because my mom's brought this up too, is like this sense of not being visible as a thing of like safety. Because I mean, if you look at the world, that's a legitimate concern. But at the same time, it's like, well, you're asking me not to be myself, so it's like, how do you find that balance? And so, when talking, like parents talking to their children, it is like you said, it's an I love you, period. And they're like, try as hard as you can not to use but in that, because it really does negate anything you said before it.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much power in just listening and asking questions, like, and listening to understand, because their lived experiences are, obviously very different than your own. And to be able to really start taking it in and just, offering that support and that safe space to voice that without that immediate, response and reaction of like getting defensive, like, oh my God, like, how could you do this to me? Or like, what did I do wrong in raising you, sort of thing. And I think, the thing that would have made the difference is having that and just being like, hey, kind of tell me more about what's going on. Like, what are you feeling? What kind of experience have you been going through? And just asking the questions that come up, like, and don't make it about you, because it's not. Like, it's, if your child is coming out to you or your friend or whoever it is, like, they're trusting you with this piece of information. And they know that your response can go one of two ways. And it's terrifying for them. So even in that space, to just even thank them, thank you for trusting me, sort of thing, or just like, thank you. Like, I love you. How can I support you? And kind of leave it at that. And then, the hard part it is like, my dad wants me to continue having these conversations because he wants to learn from me, which is fair. But I think it's also unfair to both parties, because it takes a lot of emotional energy to continually have these conversations, especially someone who is so close to you too, because there's added emotions, in there. And being able to do your own research and being able to find different perspectives and stories. I mean, the internet's amazing now, like with social media, like there's so many people you can turn to who have videos and blog posts and books out there, and just kind of take it all in. And I think when you're able to do your own work, coming back to have conversations with your loved one is going to be more meaningful, because you have things to pull on and you don't have to rely on them to kind of relive, what is usually traumatic experiences, kind of going through that, coming out process.
Makes me think that there's a gap, I think, in supporting dads, because you hear a lot of like mama dragons, the mama, what's the other one, mama bears. There's all kinds of different groups that are advocating for queer kids from moms. And even like my own parent retreat that I led was all moms. And like, where are the dads? And I have a similar experience. Like, my dad and I were so tight, and like, yeah, I think there's probably a lot of lesbians who were really close with their dad, and then it kind of got changed in some way. And which is ironic because you would think that it would be a relief for the dad because then he can still be your main man.
Right. But then, I think about my dad too, because we actually had a discussion. I don't know, it was like maybe a year or so into me like coming up to him where one of my cousins got married. And I'm like, Dad, would you walk me down the aisle? And he said no. Like, I'd like to think if push came to shove, he would. But I mean, that sticks with you. Because I think a lot of fathers have this vision of walking their daughters down the aisle, giving them away to like, this really great man, having like this very traditional sense of family. And when that kind of blows up in their face, when their daughter's now a lesbian, it's like, okay, but that doesn't mean our love is any different. It doesn't mean we couldn't adopt or go through different ways to have children. And so yeah, I think I never even thought about that though, about how there's a lot of those mom groups and support, but that lacking of fathers.
Yeah.
Because I think they are probably people who could use, I would argue, like the most support, because I feel like men in general just feel very like, I gotta just man up and deal with it on my own. But if they have like that support of other, dads going through similar things, I think there would be so much power in that.
Yeah, I think that's really important for them to be able to share what's coming up, because you're right, they don't usually share in general, and then especially there's so much stigmatization that comes up with it for them. I'll tell you a hopeful story.
Yes.
My dad came with the weed whacker and weed whacked a wide berth on the like nature aisle that we were going to go down for our wedding. And so that was like my moment of being like, okay, he's for me. He loves me.
Oh, I love that. That's so beautiful, because it's like even helping prepare for that moment and making that space for you and your wife. And
yeah,
I think they're mostly good eggs.
Yeah.
I've learned to have more compassion over the years too, and acknowledging that like this is something I've been sitting with and working through, and how hard of work that is. And then to have, my dad have to look at, his 60 plus years of life, what he grew up, like the times too, the time he grew up is very different from how we're living, like, and what's around and going on in society now, and just how much that impacts him too, because like his church community is like his second family. And so when he's kind of forced to kind of go between the two and figure out like how does this all make sense, like that's a lot of work. And so I've moved from a place of just kind of like anger and frustration and like, why can't you just love and accept me, to like, okay, you still love me, you still support me, and you're trying. Like, I know this is a process, and I know you don't intend to be, pushing me out, pushing me away, and that we both have this desire to mend our relationship and to make it stronger, because I mean, he's still my dad, he's still my guy. And that's something like, I know we could continue to work on, and part of me knows I will have to accept most likely that he won't fully understand, and that's okay. Like, what can I be okay with in our relationship, and what boundaries do I have to set if it doesn't look the way I wish it could look?
Yeah, I think that's so wise to give them time to, and trust that they're doing their work, even though it may look differently. And I keep going back to this parent retreat, but it's pertinent today. The thing that many of them came to as they were working through the retreat was that their kids coming out stirred up something within them, and they had to look at that. And so just, having grace for our parents and recognizing, this is probably stirring up some kind of inadequacy, some kind of questioning their validity, their way of doing things well, and that that's a hard road, but that also is a gift. Like it's showing up for them to show them a new layer of growth for them to move forward if they so choose.
So you're telling me your parents are just humans too?
What?
But I think that's such a good point too, because like as kids, like our parents are our idols, they can do no wrong. And then, you know, for especially those of us who come out like, you know, later in life, or even during like, you know, the teen years and stuff, like when you're starting to realize that your parents, you know, don't know everything, that, you know, you are gonna butt heads. And then you add this layer of your sexuality or gender identity to it. It's like, what? It just like, I think makes it even more intense in how like their, you know, their baby girl, their baby boy is now something, you know, I don't want to say different, but they're growing into a person that maybe they didn't anticipate or doesn't make sense in their world.
Yeah, they have to rewrite the story of what they hoped for you, and maybe release writing credits of it.
Yep.
Be free. I don't know what it's gonna be.
Yep. And then, like I said, deal with their own insecurities that pop up around it, because I'm not, you know, a parent. I am, you know, I have fur babies, but I can imagine like it's such a scary job, because here you are trying to raise these young children in a world and hoping you're doing okay. And then when something like this happens, like, well, what did I do wrong? Like, where did I go wrong? Even though obviously we know they didn't do anything wrong, except maybe how they're reacting right now could be better. It just kind of is a mental gymnastics for them, trying to figure everything out.
So what's your next coming out story?
It's a good question. I think it's really about, I've been hiding, like my dad knows I've started up like a coaching business, and I started coaching creatives because that was like what I knew that was my safe space, and I didn't have to be out. But now that I've pivoted and I'm really leaning into I guess what I'm called to do and who I'm called to serve, I think my next coming out story is really like coming out in my business, like to him and to like the people like in my life. Like I'm on Instagram all the time because like, yeah, I have some friends and family there, but a lot of it's just like strangers or other like LGBTQ community members, so it's safe. Whereas like Facebook and like in the real world, like when I'm home at family gatherings and stuff, like I don't openly talk about it. And so I think like the next phase for me is really being able to be open about it, because what I'm doing professionally obviously is so intertwined in like my personal life, who I am as a person. And so being able to now bring the two together and just be me, I think is really where I am striving to get to.
If you had a magic wand and you could just like wave it and it would make that easier, what would it have done to have made that easier?
I think it would have, I always have my dad in the back of my head when I post anything, you know, to do with, you know, me being gay or just anything to do in the community. And, you know, that magic wand would just have him be that loving, supportive, affirming parent where I don't have to feel a need to show up a certain way for him to make it more palatable. Yeah. I think the same could be said for my mom, because she worries, you know, the more I'm out there being visible. But that's that motherly, like, protective factor, I think, more so. Obviously, like, she still has her faith too, but it's always, in my eyes, been more of that, like, wow, what if some crazy person finds you? Like, what if they like, I'm like, it's okay. This is bigger than me, you know?
Yeah. I have so many more questions and things I could go into to help maybe shift some of that so that you feel more freedom, but we won't go into that right now.
Next
we can
time.
talk later. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you currently excited about in your business?
I am really excited about, I am in the middle of creating a coming out journal that it's an idea that I had when I was in the middle of God's country up in northern Minnesota, just surrounded by, like Superior and just nature. But I am piecing together kind of a guided journal. So prompts, whether it's like personal, faith, relationships, work and business, to kind of help people process all those heavy emotions and fears that come up and help prepare them for those, heavy, hard conversations that just happen with family, friends, whoever, and give hope that things will get better and that they are enough. Like, you are enough, you are worthy of love, success, all the things. And then just offering little kind of like words of like insights and just encouragement along the way. So I'm really excited to be able to put that out into the world as another resource for people who are just feel alone and unsure of how to move forward in this crazy journey.
Mm-hmm. That's so awesome.
Thank you.
How can people find you?
I spend a lot of time on Instagram, so just at Hannah Strenger. My DMs are always open, and I post a lot of photos of my rabbits. So if you like little cuddly, fluffy creatures, I gotcha.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your story with us today, Hannah.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Coming Out Chronicles. If you enjoyed it, give it a like. And if you think it would be helpful for someone else, please share it with them. If you'd like to connect with me, reach out on social. I'd love to support you on the next chapter of your coming out story. Until next time, this is Nancy Shadlock from Centered Life Coaching.